You know me as the host of the Too Busy to Eat show, but I'm also founder and CEO of Too Busy to Eat, the protein bar company. I make what I feel is the healthiest and best tasting protein bar on the market. So now it developed from my own frustration of not being able to find a bar that tasted good and that was extremely healthy, that I could have maybe multiple times a day if I was really busy, or I could feed my kids and not feel guilty about what they ate. So I created this bar with grass-fed whey protein, no more than 3 grams of sugar, which is all naturally occurring, and it's gluten-free, non-GMO, the list goes on. So don't take my word for it. I want you to try them. And I want to give you incentive to try them. So I'm going to give you 20% off your first order. You can get a sample bag of bars, or you can get a whole box, whatever you want. Go to my website, toobusytoeat.com. Not hard to remember. Show, the company. And enter the promo code TBTE Show. TBTE Show. Actually, it's a discount box when you check out, and you'll get 20% off your first order, no matter how small or large. So go to the website now, try them out, and then let me know what you think. Welcome to the Too Busy to Eat show. I am so excited about today's show. We have Nina Teicholz on the show today. She is the author of The Big Fat Surprise, which in 2014, The Economist said it was the #1 science book. The best science book. And I'll tell you what, the science that she reveals in this book is mind-blowing. So get ready to be blown away with Nina Teicholz. Here we go.
I know we've talked before, but with your schedule of things going on, it's really an honor to have you on the show. So I know people listening are going to get so much out of the things that you've brought up to your book, and your research are amazing. So we need to get into that. But I've given everybody an intro. I've told them about basically how awesome you are. How the book has been The Big Fat Surprise. The Economist said is the best book in 2014. But can you tell us a little bit about what you do to get to your point here? What was kind of your journey in a quick summary?
Yeah. Well, my book does a few things. The main argument that it makes, it was the first book really, or any kind of published account, arguing that saturated fats, specifically those fats that are, found in animal foods, but also in coconut oil, palm oil, saturated fats have been unfairly demonized and are not bad for your health. They do not cause cardiovascular disease. And so that's kind of the central theme of my book. But my book, did a number of other things. Like it was the first book really to make it into the mainstream. As you said, it was voted not the best book, but the best science book by The Economist.
I think it's the best book, but yes.
Overdo it as much as I'd like to. But it really tells the story for a general reader. Like, how did we get here? Like, how is it that we have nearly 60 years of policy based on very weak science that was repeatedly disproved? There were clinical trials on more than 65,000 people, like an amazing body of clinical trials testing this idea that saturated fats cause heart disease. And they just kept getting null results. No, they don't. No, they don't. No, they don't. And, it's true. They could lower people's cholesterol by reducing saturated fats, by swapping out saturated fats for polyunsaturated vegetable oils. But it did not make any effect on cardiovascular mortality, which is what you want to know. Will I have a heart attack if I eat these fats, and will I die earlier? And the answer is definitively no. But the question you always get is, well, how on earth did that happen? How do we live with it so long? Where were the critics? Where was the good science? Why was science not followed? Why? So I tell the story of how it all happened.
Right.
And I also tell, I really go into more than, if you read Gary Taubes, he covers some of this, but I go into well, what are the unintended consequences? There have been 2 really big unintended consequences by demonizing saturated fats and therefore dramatically reducing the amount of animal foods we eat, right? So the last 30 years, meat is down, red meat is down by 17%, whole meat is down by 73%, across the board, pretty much except for maybe cheese, every other animal down by 17%, eggs down by 17%. Yeah. So what has been the unintended consequences of this. And a big one is that I discuss really at length in my book is the way we've ramped up vegetable oils.
Yes.
Not in the food supply until 1911, then was introduced in the form of Crisco. And I go into that whole history, not only of what are the health impacts of those vegetable oils. They've grown more. It's the single biggest increase of any food item in the American food supply over the last, it's grown by like 121,000 times in soybean oil, right? So now every packaged food that you pick up has like soybean oil in it. And all the restaurant fryers are full of soybean oil or corn oil. Yeah. So I talk about like the hidden science of these oil in all those clinical trials on those 65,000 people. When they swapped out the saturated fat for unsaturated fat, they saw cancer rates go up in the groups eating soybean oil and corn oil. That's a cause and effect relationship, not like a weak epidemiological relationship. So I talk a lot about that. Talk about the personalities, the institutions. I try to tell the story, like, how did this all happen? And I have a special chapter on the Mediterranean diet, which is a wild story that shows you how industry affects science, because that's really the story of how the European Olive Oil Association funded a series of best ever fantastic food conferences for all the nutrition experts in America. And out of that oil-fused free vacation conference experience came the Mediterranean diet, which is not really a scientific concept.
No.
So,
is that your biggest discovery? Like reading your book and just listening to the things you talk about, I don't know if it's the arrogance, but the medical community, they in the research community, how they ignore. Was that shocking to you as you first discovered that? How they just ignore what the truth is revealing?
Yeah, so the term for that is selection bias, right? You ignore the things that don't fit with your hypothesis, and then you select the things that do fit with your hypothesis. And I have to tell your audience about the greatest ever example of that, which was the Minnesota Coronary Survey, which is the biggest ever test of Ansel Keys' hypothesis on 9,000 men and women in mental hospitals. So the kind of experiment you can't do nowadays because it's considered unethical. Highly controlled environment. You're providing all the meals, right?
Yes. That's
so highly reliable. At the end of that, and Ansel Keys was one of the project investigators. At the end of that, they found the people who cut their saturated fat intake in half and replaced all that with soybean oil, like soy-filled cheese, soy-filled milk. They showed no improvement, and actually, it was found they had higher rates of heart disease, and they didn't publish that. They sat on those results for 16 years and didn't publish them. And when they did publish them, they put them in this really out-of-the-way journal that they knew nobody would ever read. And when Gary Teicholz actually approached one of the other project investigators and said, well, how come you didn't publish them? They said, well, we were just so disappointed in the way they came out. So it's just
true.
It's an example of how this non-truth, this failed hypothesis has existed for so long, because researchers just believed it so strongly that they literally couldn't believe their own results when they came out. And this example that I'm telling you, it's there are 50 examples like that.
It's just one of the,
where they're just well, our study didn't show it, so there must be something wrong with our study, because we still believe the same thing. They just could not believe that they were wrong.
Well, you said there's a bunch of that happening. So do you find that as you dig deeper, you just keep seeing that over and over and over again?
Over and over. And that's part of the, I researched this book for nearly a decade, and, you read every single nutrition science study ever done, and you can't believe the trove of literature that is out there. One of the stories we all hear is well, there's not enough literature out there. We need to do more trials. We don't really understand enough about nutrition. In fact, billions of dollars was spent by the government doing massive amounts of research, but it's just all been buried because it didn't show what they wanted it to show. It's and literally the authors themselves say in their conclusions, you see this again and again, well, this study did not confirm the diet heart hypothesis, which is the hypothesis that saturated fat cholesterol causes heart disease, but there needs to be more research. Or that's the classic thing. You just read that again and again and again, and you still read that today. Right?
Absolutely. Oh yeah.
We can't confirm our idea, but that doesn't mean it's wrong.
Yeah. Yeah. You do enough studies and you keep taking the only ones that fit, then you're going to get your proof, but all the other stuff is just left in the sideline. So that's amazing. I mean,
it's just like, that's the rule of science. You have a hypothesis, you try to prove it. If they've spent billions of dollars trying to prove this hypothesis. After you've spent billions of dollars on tens of thousands of people and you can't prove it, you have to accept that hypothesis really just is very likely not to be true. So let's move on. Yeah. I guess my message is like, let's move on and study other ideas about what causes obesity and diabetes, because people are sure not getting any healthier and are, like, people look fat and sick and miserable, and we need better ideas about what causes that, Yeah.
And luckily now the villain of sugar is getting more and more press, but you still have this backlog of false information and the average person has been berated with this misinformation for so many years that they don't get it. I just think of, friends and family around me when they see what I eat, they're just like, oh my gosh, what are you doing to yourself? I don't know how you look healthy and you're eating all this stuff.
You must be unhealthy.
Yes. They've been brainwashed. They've been misinformed.
Well, I think people understand that sugar is bad. And I think that's like intuitive for most people, and they get it. Like desserts, sugar seems bad, empty calories. But what they don't get, and the harder thing to get across to people, is that really eating an overall high carbohydrate diet is because, many of what seem like healthy carbs, like whole grains, beans, even a diet too high in all those foods, they all become glucose in your body. Your body doesn't really know the difference. And, and currently our government still recommends a high carbohydrate diet, right? So our government recommends that we get 55% of our calories as carbohydrates. That's up almost 30% over what we used to eat like in 1960, before the obesity epidemic. So our government recommends a level of carbohydrates that seems guaranteed to make people obese and fat. And they think they're being healthy because they're having healthy looking things like a lot of whole grains, a lot of cereals, a lot of, oatmeals, and a lot of
breads. Whole wheat bread is funny.
But your body experiences all of that as glucose. And if you aren't getting enough, if your diet isn't also balanced with fats and proteins like we used to be, we used to in 1965, we ate over 40% of our calories as fat. Then the low fat diet came along and shoved that down to like 30-35%, maybe 25%. And so, that's a huge, huge macronutrient shift.
Yes. Yeah. And it's being replaced with the processed foods, everything we're mentioning, which is basically in your body is treating it like sugar. So we've just totally flipped everything. And that's why your research, your book is so important, because we need to, for the health of our country, we need to get back to where we were, before the 60s, and eating those whole foods where it's, the whole, like my coffee with my, heavy whipping cream. It sounds crazy, but the heavy cream, it's healthier than putting non-fat milk in my coffee, and people need to know that. Yeah.
Right. And they need to not fear the fat.
Right.
And, what I say is the country needs to back out of our high carb diet. We've just gotten used to the high carb diet being normal. We think meat and cheese and eggs and butter are bad. We've just become used to avoiding them. And we've become habituated to thinking like, oh, the hummus must be better for me than the cheese or salami. So, it's little choices like that seem really so healthy, but they add up. And then all of a sudden you're having pasta for dinner and hummus for lunch and a sandwich or oatmeal for breakfast. That's a high carb diet. And that's what the government tells us to eat. So, and that's what you get in school lunches. And that's what the military gets. And that, everybody is habituated to that diet. So
if you're a rule follower and you follow what is given to you, you would be making yourself unhealthy, setting yourself up for disease in the long run. but that's what we're told to eat, and that's what people are doing. But luckily, there's great information that is getting out there now, more and more. Which is since 2014, you had this big splash, this great, the reviews and what they said about your book in 2014 was amazing. What have you seen since then, since 2014? I'm sure your world's been opened up to so many different things.
Yeah. Well, it's been an interesting ride, I must say. So a number of things that happened. One is that because my book came out and received so much acclaim, and I was I am really, it hit the mainstream in a way that other researchers haven't been able to hit the mainstream. So I became a very high profile target. And that means that I became the subject of criticism. I wrote about the nasty bullying politics of nutrition science in my book. I mean, literally dozens of examples where researchers, to undermine each other, call each other names, literally, accuse each other work of being full of errors, disinviting people from panels, all kinds of like bullying tactics. You think science is like this calm, sober march step of people reckoning with each other's ideas, but that is so not the case. And I talk about this in my book, and I should not have been at all surprised to find that, now I'm living the latest chapter in this story. So, I've been disinvited from a major food policy conference, and then I had thousands of people sign a petition to try to get me back on. That was a big conference in DC where the other members said they wouldn't sit on the panel with me because I was a critic of the dietary guidelines, and they were all government people, and they were like, we don't want to hear any criticism, which is amazing, really, when you think about it. I've been literally called names by, this Yale doctor who is like, literally calls me names. Like, says I'm a parasite of science, and things like that. Yeah. And I mean, again, like, I'm not surprised. I studied this. I've documented how this happens, but it's still shocking to be the recipient of it, to see the force with which it has been unleashed on me because I'm challenging the status quo. And it's not just that, she's a journalist, and, I understand that. But it's because the corporations who are threatened by this are enormous, and there's a tremendous interest. There's the vegetable oil companies, which include ADM, Monsanto, Cargill, Bunge, the biggest companies in the world, Unilever. They've been calling the shots in nutrition science for decades. Pharmaceutical companies, they make a lot of money on all the drugs that people take when they're fat and sick, right? So they're all, and they give tons of money to nutrition scientists, right? Because they have a vested interest in keeping people fat and sick. Right. I mean, I could just go on. And there's the entire federal government who's invested in this diet, and the whole grain, soy, corn industries that supply that big bottom slab of the food pyramid where everybody now eats from. So, there are big industry interests that I've come up against. And actually, it's interesting to see for me, when I am calm and kind of clinical and detached from it, if I can see the levers of power and I can see the way they work together, and I come to understand how they use advocates and how they use just the ways in which they manipulate the media, and I can see now, having like been on the inside of this for a while, and I look forward to being able to write about that. Right, now you can reveal all that to people, which would be really enlightening for people to see that. Yeah, I think like the real food politics, like not what you hear, what the story is from most of the media, the kind of the story that they deliver. But the other thing that I did was, that made me even more of a target, was that I did a really serious critique of the expert report behind our dietary guidelines. The dietary guidelines is the government policy that comes out once every 5 years. Yeah. The latest version came out earlier this year. Yeah. And I did a very serious critique of that, the so-called expert report behind that, and I had that published in the British Medical Journal, is now known as BMJ. Yeah. And that really accuses it makes a number of points that are devastating for them. It says, look, the reviews have not been done systematically. They literally are like, we'll take this study and we'll take that study, and there's no search methodology, or they don't, they give a search methodology, but they also include a bunch of other papers that are outside their search methodology. So, the dietary guidelines tells everybody to eat low fat dairy and lean meat, right?
Right.
Would you think they've reviewed the evidence on low fat dairy and lean meat? Never. Not a single review on low fat dairy and lean meat.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of evidence to show that low fat dairy is a lot less healthy than full fat dairy.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So just things like that. And then I pointed out the conflicts of interest of all the people on the committee and how their recommendations dovetail with their conflicts of interest. Their various corporate. The head of the committee for the first time was the head of a corporation. She wasn't even from academia.
Right. Well, how was that received? I mean, that couldn't have been received well from them, but how is it received? So then 180 scientists, led by the Center for Science and the Public Interest, which is a so-called public interest group in DC, sent around a letter asking to retract the paper. 180 scientists from around the world signed this letter. And the BMJ is still reviewing that matter, and they've told me they're not going to retract the paper, but they still are kind of going through. It's been 8 months now. They're trying to, because they have all these scientists from around the world who are desperate for me to be wrong. Yes.
Because if I'm not wrong, then the dietary guidelines are seriously flawed, and that's a problem.
Yeah.
But
is this something you're thinking about putting together as maybe a book to reveal this, or is it more just writings as you're doing now?
I'll definitely do another book at some point, and I think that this story needs to be told. But right now, I'm going to do smaller pieces, and I'm also working with this group in Washington, D.C. that's really trying to improve our dietary guidelines. It's called the Nutrition Coalition. And I'll give you that link so people can go there and sign up and be members if they want to contribute to the cause. Because, even if you think, most of us think like, oh, what are the dietary guidelines? Who cares? That doesn't affect me. I don't go to a .gov website to learn about nutrition. I'm an independent thinker. But the reality is they reach into our lives in ways that almost everybody's touched by them. It's the military rations are based on them, so our fighting forces. School lunches are key to them, so your kids, if they go to a public school, are eating that food. The elderly in elderly home and health, and then all doctors, nutritionists, and dietitians are pretty much like they have to. So all of your coworkers and family and friends, and even if you know the science, that every time you talk to somebody, even your close family members, they're like, "Oh, you're full of it." It's because all their doctors and all of their experts are telling them what the dietary guidelines say. And the dietary guidelines are not based on evidence, not evidence-based. So
this Nutrition Coalition is trying to educate. I mean,
we're trying to educate policymakers in Washington about this new alternative science and how these randomized controlled clinical trials on 65,000 people that have been ignored for decades. We want that entered into the record. Because they've never been reviewed by a dietary guideline committee. So we're trying to, sorry, something just came up on my screen. We're trying to educate policymakers about how the dietary guidelines need to be changed and why they need to be changed. And we're trying to break into a conversation that has been dominated by industry and and to the extent that there are kind of public interest groups, they're all on the side of the government. They've all been working with the government for so long. There's just no alternative thinking. And so, they either don't know or are ignoring the, really sizable body of literature on the low carbohydrate diet. There's 60 trials on the low carb diet showing that it's safe and effective. And the dietary guidelines still calls that, a fad and potentially dangerous diet, which is, just not borne out by the literature. So we're trying to bring this kind of alternative thinking to Washington where it really needs to change.
Which is, that's where that's the heart of it, where it needs to start there. Now, somebody listening is probably this person that is trying to get healthy shows too busy to eat. People are busy doing this. This is probably overwhelming for them. I mean, wow, everything I've learned is pretty much wrong to some extent. Do you have like an advice or for somebody that is really seeking out the truth of how to eat healthy, and they're in a lifestyle that has them on the go? They're a businessman, or a businesswoman, somebody on the go. Do you have like a piece of advice to give them to move forward as they try to absorb this and then get healthy?
Yeah. Well, because I'm pretty much always on the go and never cook meals, really, I eat a lot of cured meats like salami, braciole, like all kinds of wonderful Italian meats. They don't have to be expensive, but they're an amazingly good on-the-go food. That and cheese pretty much are, they're low carb, so you won't get an insulin response. They are relatively high fat, which is good, and will give you the fats you need. You do not have to fear the fat because saturated fat does not cause heart disease. And meat, which is getting a really bad rap in the media right now due to some really bad science, meat does not cause any kind of disease. Like all of those scary headlines that you see are based on really weak epidemiological evidence that shows tiny, tiny associations and it's the kind of data. I mean, the statistic that I have to give your listeners is like epidemiological findings can only be confirmed in clinical trials when they've tried to confirm them 0 to 20% of the time. So it has an 80% chance of being wrong. So, and that's only when when the association is big. For the kind of associations you see with meat, so big, I mean like over 5 or 6, the relative risk of a number over 5 or 6. The ones with meat are like 1.2, 1.3, which is basically nothing. 1 means there's no association. So they're kind of scaremongering about meat on like 1.2 or 1.3. And I just, the obvious question is, why do nutrition scientists scaremonger? Well, it is a way to, you become a famous and well-funded nutrition scientist if you have like that one-word answer to why you're fat and diabetic.
That's right.
And so they need to campaign on issues. So they campaigned on trans fats, and then they campaign on something else. And everybody's campaigning now on the back of meat. But the evidence just really isn't there. So I eat a lot of cold cuts.
Which is great. I mean, that's how I get a lot of my food intake that way too. It's phenomenal. It's good for an on-the-go person. It's fulfilling. It's satisfying. And
and if there is any danger in them, and maybe there's some, the cheapest kind use fillers or what they call meat extenders or things that they kind of fill them up with that maybe additives that aren't healthy. But you get it at prosciutto or I mean, there's nothing. The Italians have been eating that for thousands of years. They have some of the lowest heart disease rates in the world.
Right.
And it's not the processed meat.
Right. No, that's
also,
fantastic. Yeah.
Just one other point on that.
Sure.
Beef consumption has dropped by 22%, gone down by 22% in America during the exact years when obesity and diabetes have skyrocketed. So if you think that is the cause of obesity, it's just crazy.
Yeah, it doesn't connect at all. Yeah, no, it's not. The charts are easy to watch. When our processed food and everything is going up, and our fat intake's going down, our meat going down. I mean, it doesn't connect. It doesn't connect.
It doesn't compute.
Yeah.
So anyway, that's maybe
the average person. Not even to the average person, if you actually see that. Those kind of things, those kind of charts that are real clear, like here's the intake of meat going down, here's the obesity and health going, the disease going up. I mean, those are, there's other factors involved, but that's very plain to see. And so that's some of the stuff that's struck me.
You're like, if meat is driving obesity, it can't be going down while obesity is up. Like, it's just like, that's just not
directions.
But I'm telling you, there are plenty of elite scientists at the very top echelons of our nutrition establishment who will argue. They're like,
oh, absolutely.
That doesn't show anything. That's just a correlation. Like, yeah, but it's a contradiction. But I've had these conversations where like, no, that's a crude ecological correlation. I was like, it's a contradiction.
Right.
Meat is a major driver of disease. You would see it rise together.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. Well, Nina, this is fantastic. I love talking to you because I just feel, one, because your book has been life-changing for me. I mean, but it's been very helpful. I just feel encouraged myself because I'm helping get the information out, your information out more and more. So I can't thank you enough. And for those that want to know more, it's Nina's easy to get a hold of. You can go to thebigfatsurprise.com and contact her there. Big Fat Surprise on Twitter. She's very active on Twitter, so that's a great way to connect with her. But it's just I encourage those people that are wrestling, saying, what do I do? First of all, I mean, the best thing I can tell you is read the Big Fat Surprise. That would be a great thing to do, and listen to my show. But Big Fat Surprise would be a great thing to get us started with.
Thank you, and thank you for your great show. And I was saying to people, like, it is like, take your own health into your own hands, learn for yourself, see what the science says, make your own choice. And then if you find it transformative, contribute and help change so that our whole country can be healthier. That's the thing. So then go to the Nutrition Coalition and join, and like, it has to be all of us joining together because it's a grassroots movement. It's not going to be a top-down movement. So
right. We'll definitely put that Nutrition Coalition link in the show notes so people can get to that. But Nina, that's fantastic. I can't thank you enough for your time. I will support all those things that people say bad things. We'll make sure my listeners, myself, we'll counteract those with positive comments and things on all your different channels. So thank you so much. It's been fantastic.
Thank you. And right back at you. Thank you very much.